Well, I got to be honest, guys. I wasn't particularly optimistic about this film when I saw the first trailer. It looked like it was going to be just sort of mostly joke-oriented, and it disappointed me really because it looked like Pixar were just resorting to the kind of DreamWorks level of things, of just it mostly being jokes. You know, it was very much that case, I think, in the two Cars films. Brave wasn't like that. Brave was more sort of character oriented, but it was also kind of sort of not particularly ambitious, not particularly imaginative. It was just a kind of a sort of nothing type story. But I'm happy to say that this film definitely surprised me. It was very much a character-based story. There wasn't a huge amount of jokes in here. There were a few, but it was just simply a solid story. It was kind of like Wreck-It Ralph was a bit like that for me. I assumed, seeing the trailer and reading about the premise, that it was going to be mostly jokes, but actually it's just a solid story. Confused Matthew, I think, does a good job of sort of summarising what makes Pixar films good in comparison to the DreamWorks animated films, and that is that you just simply care more when you watch a good Pixar film, whereas with the good DreamWorks films, you're just sort of laughing for the most part. And I think that was what was missing with the two previous Pixar films that I've seen, Cars 2 and Brave. I didn't really care for the characters in any particular major way. I absolutely cared. In fact, it's kind of funny. I normally have these moments, particularly in animated films, where I just sort of know that I'm liking the film, and I know I'm going to want to give it praise when I come out of the theatre. It's normally sort of halfway or two-thirds of the way through the film. With this film, I think it was the very first scene. That prologue scene with Mike actually visiting the factory where he would obviously work later in his life. That was me, honestly, at school, really. Nobody really cared for me. Nobody really was interested in being friends with me. I was more just sort of kind of an outcast. I mean, I didn't mind that, really. I'm much more comfortable being on my own. It was just kind of a bit demoralising when people tell you, you know, you can't do this, or we don't want to be associated with you or anything. But at the same time, Mike sort of strives to continue to do what he wants to do with his life. That's actually something I think my sister could better relate to than I could. She's a primary school teacher, and throughout the time at university when she was studying to become a teacher, she had a lot of people speaking to her saying, you know, you just don't seem like the type who should be a primary school teacher. You don't have that kind of firmness. You seem like too sort of softer person. And her response basically was, screw that. This is what I've strived to do ever since I was a kid. I'm not going to let anybody else convince me to change my mind. This is my decision. And this is definitely what Mike is going through throughout the entire film. People keep telling him, you know, this isn't the right profession for you. You shouldn't be doing this. This isn't the kind of thing you should be striving to do. And Mike, quite rightfully, shows self-confidence and determination in what he's doing, and knows that he is capable of doing everything in his power to become a scarer. But the honest truth is that sometimes, you know, you just don't have that kind of special talent. I mean, with Mike, obviously, it's a much more sort of obvious thing. He just physically isn't able. He doesn't have that kind of physical appearance that would make him scary in any kind of obvious way. But I think it's very true in life as well, that, you know, if you're just simply not naturally talented at something, it doesn't matter how hard you work or how much you strive to succeed, you're just not going to be able to do it. And then, of course, you have Sully on the other side of things, who is kind of the opposite kind of problem. People actually kind of expect him to do well because his father was a legendary scarer, although it's kind of disappointing, really, that we never actually meet his father. We're never told anything about his father. We're just told that his father was a great scarer. We're just supposed to believe that, really. That was a little bit weak, I thought. But it's interesting, really, I think that this is the opposite problem to Mike. Mike wants to become a scarer, and nobody thinks he should be. Sully is actually expected to become a scarer. Mike has the ambition and knows what he needs and is required to do in order to study to become a scarer. Sully actually doesn't know what to do. He isn't interested in studying. He thinks that he can just simply go ahead and do it. And, well, as it turns out, actually that did kind of turn out to be the case. I think this is maybe a problem with the fact that this is a prequel. We know where these characters are going to end up. We know Sully's going to be a scarer. We know Mike is just going to be, you know, his partner in that. And we know they're going to become friends ultimately. So that's maybe a problem, I think. That's a problem I have with a lot of prequels, really, is just we know where these characters are going to end up. We know if they're going to die or not. We know if they're going to become friends. We know who they aren't going to become friends with. Fortunately, that isn't a huge problem outside of Mike and Sully. There's only one other character in this film who was in the first film, and that's Randall. There's quite a good joke, I think, when Randall's introduced, which is when Mike's entering his dorm. He's like, you know, your lifelong friend is behind this door, and of course you expect it to be Sully, and no, it's Randall. It was kind of an amusing kind of twist, and I thought to myself, oh, this will be kind of interesting. This is sort of what Randall used to be like. He used to be kind of geeky and kind of a social outcast, and I I was interested to see where they went with this kind of arc of Randall's character, but actually they kind of forget about Randall sort of midway through the film, and his sort of rivalry with Sully is kind of forced in there at the very end. But there's not a huge amount of growth or interesting things about his character arc. It was really just there sort of as a quick gag, I think. You know, Randall and Mike were roommates in college. Basically, it's just a sort of joke. The sort of setting for this film is a little bit generic, I would say. You know, this kind of university where, you know, the main characters are getting pushed around by bullies and everybody telling them they're no good or something. And again, it results to that kind of college/sports movie kind of thing of them being competitive and trying to win and everything, and nobody thinking they're going to be capable of doing it, and it kind of resulting to that kind of Rocky format of it, them starting out not doing particularly well, and then they go through training montages, and gradually they get better and better, and eventually, of course, they win. I think another problem this film suffers from is that there's a little bit too many characters, really. I mean, certainly with this being a prequel, I expected this to be just Mike and Sully, you know, the characters that we knew from the first film, and I actually expected a lot of sort of references to the original film, you know, just sort of to work off our knowledge from the first film. And there's a few gags here and there, like we see Waternoose, we see Roz, and we see the Abominable Snowman, oddly enough. That was probably just to get John Reisenberger his usual role that he has in all the Pixar films in there, really, I think. But there's a few too many new characters, I think, in this film, you know, that you have to keep track of. There's various sort of rival characters that are basically just telling Mike and Sully constantly, you know, that they're no good. There's the Dean character, who's actually a woman, which is kind of an interesting kind of twist. She's voiced by Helen Mirren, so kind of again maybe showing a strong sort of female character. And fortunately, unlike Waternoose in the first film and him turning out to be evil, they didn't go down that kind of route with her, which I was kind of relieved about, because actually her design, it does look for all the world like she's going to be revealed as the villain or the villainous character later on in the film, and thankfully they didn't go down that route, so I was happy about that. And again, there's kind of these sort of loser team cliches that they go down, you know, all the other members of the team are no good, you know, they're not sure of themselves, they're kind of bumbling around idiots kind of characters. But thankfully they're not resorted to just sort of being the comic relief too much like you would see in a lot of films. There is the danger, I think, really, with films like this, that they're going to resort down to a lot of cliches and a lot of sort of obvious jokes and a lot of obvious gags, and this film doesn't go quite the whole hog with those kinds of jokes, but it does do that quite a lot with these sort of bumbling idiots, jerk characters, overpowering figure telling them they're no good kind of thing. But it doesn't go quite as far as it could have done, so in that sense it's okay. But I think what really drives this film is the relationship between Mike and Sully, and I think this is really the reason why they decided to make the film. It was interesting, I think, to see how Mike and Sully first became friends, because when you see them in the first film, they don't come across as the type of characters that would naturally be friends. They seem very different. They seem to have sort of different kinds of ambitions in life, and they seem like actually the kind of social circles that they would be part of would be very different. Mike's more kind of a sort of more down-to-earth, self-contained kind of guy, more of a hard worker, and Sully's maybe more kind of a jock. He's kind of a tough guy, maybe goes out drinking a lot kind of character. So it's kind of a mystery how they became friends, and it feels very natural, the reason why they became friends. I think they play off each other's differences very well. Sully goes into the rooms and scares people, while Mike knows all the theory, while Sully knows all the practical, if you like. You know, he coaches him and everything, and we see that at the start of the first film, of course, with Mike training Sully. So that element of it definitely works really well, I think, the relationship between the two of them, and explaining how they became friends. Their ultimate triumph is perhaps, you know, masked by a little bit of sort of, it's tainted a little bit by the fact that they have to get kicked out of the school all the same, but they don't give up. You know, it's kind of an epilogue kind of sequence where we see them work their way up the career ladder. Kind of disappointed, actually, maybe that this was actually a prequel and not a sequel, because or even just a standalone film, because if this had been a standalone film, they could potentially have made that into a sequel, then building their careers up and ultimately becoming top scarers or something. But since we already know that that's where they're going to end up, again, this is the problem with it being a prequel, there's absolutely no point in us seeing that. But yeah, there's plenty of decent gags here, probably too many characters really for me to keep track of. It goes down sort of generic, sort of cliche kind of routes a little bit more than I would have liked, but not, it doesn't go the whole hog too much. But the relationship between Mike and Sully, I think it's actually a lot better than it was in the first film, and it feels very natural, and I understand why they are friends at the end of it. I would just like to have seen a bit more development of Randall. I mean, if you're going to put him in the film, you're going to put a character from the first film into a prequel. I would like to see him be developed a little bit more. I'm sort of interested to see why he went down the route he went down and why he ends up being the bad guy. And they don't really explore that very much. Instead, they explore new characters that we don't really care about that much. That's kind of why I have really a problem with prequels in general. With a sequel, obviously, you just continue the story. With a prequel, how many of the characters would it make sense to have in the prequel that you had in the original film? It's kind of a sort of difficult thing to judge, and I think maybe that's a problem they had here. They felt the need to introduce too many new characters, really, and I think that's where the film suffers a little bit. However, at its core, with the relationship between Mike and Sully and why they become friends ultimately, that makes a lot of sense to me, and ultimately it's not the predictable kind of ending, actually, where they actually end up being the profession that Mike takes at the end just to be Sully's coach, when originally he was striving to become a scarer. It's not what you would have expected. Kind of spoiled by the fact that we kind of know that's where Mike's going to end up, even before the film has started, since this is a prequel again. Again, that's the problem with prequels. If you just maybe try and look at this as a film on its own, it still works really well, I think. And I think this is actually better than the original. And I am absolutely thrilled that Pixar are back on form and are making solid films again. It's not an outstanding film, it's not one of the greatest animated films of all time, like, say, WALL-E or Toy Story were, but it is still a very solid film, and once again, I'm back on the Pixar bandwagon, and I'm looking forward to what they can produce next. Just one last minor point, obviously Pixar have this custom with showing short films before their main features. This was another one that was kind of just sort of centered around these two inanimate objects falling in love. And again, it's another one of those being sentimental, tugging at heartstrings kind of things. Just a kind of minor point, I kind of preferred it when they were more comedy oriented, these short films that they showed. I don't really take much interest in these two inanimate objects falling in love kind of thing. Paperman, the one they showed before Wreck-It Ralph, was kind of like that as well. It's like, yeah, we know they're going to just ultimately end the film with them getting together in some kind of way. You know, it's not very interesting, really. But anyway, Monsters University, good, but nothing, you know, historically fantastic or anything. It's not one of the greatest animated films of all time, though. But I would say that Pixar are definitely back on form. And I would say with some confidence, actually, that I think this is actually better than the original as well. Okay, that's that, guys.